Hello, and you're listening to the Wheel Talk podcast, a podcast all about women's professional road cycling, except for this week. This week, we are in between Tour Down Under and Cadel Evans' Great Ocean Road Race, and we'll be back with the full crew to talk about all the action from Cadels and wrap up the Aussie Summer of Cycling before everyone heads back to Europe and sets their attention on, well, not quite Europe just yet. We got the UAE tour coming up, but this week, we wanted to focus a little bit on a former professional who is very dear to all of our hearts, Molly Weaver, who used to race for Sunweb, had a couple horrendous crashes, stepped away from cycling, and is now very much on the adventure circuit. She does these crazy long distance rides that are super cool to follow on social media. It's an insane test of her own ability. Lauren sat down to talk with her about everything, her transition out of road and into these adventure style races and what she has planned for 2025. So before we turn our attention back to the Women's World Tour for Cadel Evans' Great Ocean Road Race this weekend, here's Lauren and Molly.
Hi, and welcome back to the Wheel Talk podcast. It's me again, your guest host, Lauren Rowney. And today I'm so excited to introduce to you Molly Weaver, ultra athlete, all-round hero, and just one of the nicest people I know. Molly is a former professional cyclist who made the switch to ultra, not gravel, like so many athletes that we know. We actually met years ago in the Girona bubble because we shared the same mutual best friend. And ever since then, we've kind of been kindred spirits. So I feel like today is a pretty special conversation for me because we always say that on this podcast, we get to talk with friends. And today I really feel that. So Molly, welcome to the podcast. I just want to start off with, how are you? You've had a busy year.
Yeah, I'm good. That was a lovely intro to start off with, so thank you very much. Yeah, I'm okay actually. I've just had kind of an off season of sorts, so a busy year and then a nice kind of 4 weeks of not doing much, which has been quite good. But yeah, probably my busiest year on the bike since I raced full time. So a bit more of a full on year, but yeah, really, really good.
So you just finished the Trans-Pyrenees. For those who don't know much about the ultra scene, what is that race? And I just want to say that Molly came in the top 10. So this is both a race for women and men. And she came top 10 overall, which is a huge effort. So Molly, do you want to just start off by telling us a little bit about what this race is and what that meant to you actually as a result? Because it started in a pretty special place and it finished in a special place.
Yeah, so the Trans-Pyrenees is kind of the sort of sister race to Transcon, which a lot people typically know that, they don't know much about ultra anyway. And you start this year in Girona, and you cross the Pyrenees once, sort of coast to coast. So you sort of nip to the coast, and then we went to San Sebastian this year, and then you turn around, and you go back across the Pyrenees, sort of coast to coast again. One way you're pretty much self-routed the whole way, so you get to map it yourself, kind of joining up checkpoints. And then the other way you do the Raid Pyrenean, which is like a really famous route through the Pyrenees, and that everyone races on the same route. And it's sort of self-supported, solo. And it was give or take 2,000k, kind of depend on how you routed it yourself, but roughly 2,000k and about 40,000 meters of climbing.
And did you, in terms of the end distance, the winner was that person? Did they route theirs a bit longer than yours? Because I know when we chatted beforehand, you said that with these races, it's actually quite important to be super into developing the routes, because that could be the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah, so I think in the top 10, I think maybe I went the longest. Maybe one other person, not many went over 2,000. And that's because I didn't do a lot of the off-road hiking passes. So I did it in 2023 as well, and I did all the hikes. And then decided that I was done with that. I'd had my moment of adventure. Yeah, no, I'm just going to go on the road. So some of those detours are massive. I think on one it was about 100k more to go round. So to go round the effectively hiking path. So it's kind of, is it quicker to ride 100k? Is it quicker to hike for 40? That's sort of the choices. Also the fatigue of and the risk of if you're hiking or riding off road on a road bike that's loaded, you've got the okay, you're more likely to have an accident or break something on the bike. And I remember from last year, your body's just destroyed. You get over a hike. I think one hike past last year, I started it sort of like 6 a.m. I didn't finish until after lunch. I'd only gone like 15k, and you're so destroyed. So I just made the choice of going road. I think the route makes. I don't think it's going to win it or lose it for you, but it probably does change the positions a little bit in there.
And would you say this has been your most successful race so far?
It's hard to say. I think probably, yeah. It probably wasn't my best executed, and it did feel a little bit like it was maybe one race too far this year. Sort of, I did feel quite fatigued, not so much physically, but just mentally in an ultra. You have to be so switched on, and I could feel that I maybe was a bit tired of that, having to have that sort of like constant resilience and the planning all the time and not stopping and being efficient. But I'd say results wise, probably yeah, that is my best race yet.
Yeah, and I think I touched on it in the introduction that we're seeing like a lot of roadies transitioning over to gravel when they're kind of like done with racing the pro race scene, but then still want to race because they've got that itch. And it seems like the gravel scene's really fun and inclusive, and I kind of get the vibe that the ultra scene is definitely a more inclusive environment. And I don't know numbers, I'm just like throwing this out of the top of my head, but it seems more balanced in terms of women and men. Why ultra? Why did you end up going into ultra?
I think maybe if I had gone straight from my road career into something, kind of the natural transition would be gravel or something like that, because that's the sort of skill set you have. It's much more of a translatable type of racing, and it's kind of what you know. But I took quite a big break, so it's not like I was building off the back of form that I already had, and I kind of didn't have that competitiveness with other people in the right way anymore. You have to, obviously, it's also about like challenging yourself and stuff, even in gravel racing or road racing. But you have to have a certain kind of competitiveness with other people. I just didn't really have that drive anymore. I wanted something that was a bit more kind of adventure first, and there was something outside of it. Like if you didn't get a result, it wasn't like that was the only thing it was about. There's other stories going on and other journeys happening, and just loving these amazing experiences. And yeah, it is a little bit more inclusive, I guess, in terms of gender and things as well. But it's also there's more space for other things to be happening. It's not just who won, who lost. It's not so like did you get a result or not. That's obviously one part of it, especially in Transpreneur that is quite a racy ultra. But there's still so many other things going on in that event or in any ultra. There's lots of different experiences and different people. And I've had events, Atlas Mountain Race this year in Morocco, where I got ill on day 2. So you're kind of like, well, the race is gone. But I still crossed the Atlas Mountains in Morocco and spent 5 days in an ultra, and there was still something that came out of that. And I wanted there to be that it was more than just did you win or lose a race.
There must have been a major change in mindset for you, because coming from professional racing on the road, I mean, we can wind it back a little bit to your career on the road. And I think for the uninitiated, Molly raced between 2015 and 18 as a professional athlete, I think. And your career started off like many as a young athlete. I think you raced the Junior Worlds, and I was trying to go back actually and see how old you are, because I always remember joking in Girona about how you were the young pup. And I realized that the year that you raced in Valkenburg in 2012 as a junior was a really stacked field. So in 2012, you had like Cassian Uedoma, Lotte Kopecky, all those riders, I think Ilaria Sanguetti, from that sort of generation. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you sort of got into pro cycling and your trajectory to where you are now?
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of got into it, not by accident, but it wasn't like I hadn't done this as a tiny kid, and it was kind of where I saw my life going. And also in the generation that we're from, I know it's slightly different in age, but a similar generation, it wasn't really like you saw much of a blueprint for it. It wasn't maybe like if you're getting into the sport now, you can see the women are racing the Tour de France, the women are doing all these things, and it's televised and you can see it. So I think a lot of us, probably the same as me, you kind of almost got carried along by whatever success you were having at the time. So I raced juniors. I kind of wasn't a golden generation, even in Britain. I mean, that's when like Lucy Garner, now Van der Hart, she won it twice in a row from Great Britain in the years that I was junior. So it's like that generation of, I mean, most of people that I was racing around became like world champions, Olympians, whatever. So we kind of got carried along by each other. We kind of, my dad set up a junior development squad because I was that age and there wasn't really that sort of thing floating around. And then so we all raced kind of in the elite level and then got into junior worlds. Then you're kind of in the sort of, not in the program, but you were kind of known to GB and stuff. And then I turned 18, 19 when someone from Britain was setting up the first British women's UCI team to go and move to Europe and do the pro scene. So kind of then I ended up in that. So then you kind of moved to Belgium, got sucked along into doing that sort of racing. And then midway through that first year, I then got signed to what is now DSM, but was somewhere and Live Planter when I raced for it. And I transferred mid-season to that team in June or July, whenever this transfer window is. So quite quickly it all happened that I moved to Belgium in the sort of spring, did the Spring Classics, and then I already raced that first Euro for then what is now DSM. And then sort of got carried along by all of that. And then I don't know if you want to talk about the demise of my career or how you want to touch on that.
Yeah, well, for those who might not have been following Cycling Tips in, I think it was 2020, you wrote a series of articles for Escape Collective, which was Cycling Tips. And you can actually pull up those articles again now if you're interested in reading about Molly's experience in the sport. And I think you were one of the first athletes who opened up publicly about just what it was like to be an athlete in this so-called professional environment, what the working standards were, and what you experienced in terms of pressure on the pressures of something we touched on with Georgie Howe, which would have been released by now, actually, was this power to weight, the conversation around power to weight and constantly focusing on how much you weigh. So in the conversation with Georgie Howe, I touched on it with Georgie Howe. We were part of that generation where there was a huge focus on the whole eating is cheating kind of culture that we used to laugh off, but very much there was this internal and external pressure to be a certain body shape, a certain size. And that wasn't reflected usually of the type of rider you were, because if you were a sprinter, for example, it wasn't very necessary for you to be, trying to weigh under 60 kilos like the climbers on your team or something like that. So I know that in these articles, you spoke about how you were very happy with your body shape and your size before you went to a certain team. And then there was this pressure that was put on you that didn't exist internally before, but from the DS to constantly monitor your weight. And actually, it ended up with the demise of your career. And the interesting thing now is, as much as I thought that was something of the past, when we look at some of the athletes and stories that are coming out now from the men and women, this is something that's still happening. Even though we like to think that the sport is professionalizing and athletes are getting help, this is something you touch on in your article, that perhaps if there was more money injected into teams and athletes, that you could have gotten the proper nutritionist advice, you could have gotten the advice from the coach and not coming from a DS who probably doesn't have the tools or means to be telling you, a woman, what your body shape and size needs to look like. So that's a bit of Molly's backstory. But if you want to touch on that, Molly, and how I perceive it, obviously we're friends, so I know a bit more of the backstory and everything. But from the outside looking in, it looks like you've had this internal battle, this love-hate relationship with the bike, but it seems like you finally found your love for it again. It was probably always there, but you lost that love because it was no longer a tool that was being used for, that self-gratification. It made you feel good. You were accomplishing goals. Instead, it was just this horrible thing that you had to wake up every day and get on your bike. And weigh yourself and just took away the love, which is not why we get into the sport in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I mean, for me, I think it was sort of a perfect storm of lots of things. I think, yeah, the sort of eating disorder, like deteriorating mental health in general. I got in a really bad crash, which kind of derailed my career already. There's a lot of it which is maybe too much too soon. I think of how, I mean, I'm 30 now, and I'm still watching now, years and years and years later, and you'll have it the same. All the riders we rode with are still there, pretty much. Like, you know, you look at the peloton, it's mostly people we raced with. It's not like we're generations away from it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were people that you were roughly around in the sort of rider you were, the sort of age you were, the kind of trajectory you could have had. So it's, I think a lot of it was maybe, yeah, everything was rushed, everything was, it has to be now. So I think there was sort of just, yeah, a lot of the pressure. I mean, some of it physical health, some of it mental health. And I think, okay, yeah, it happened to me on a team, but I think, like you say, it's happening all over the place. It's not, it wasn't like an isolated incident. But I think by the time I stopped, it had been a slow burn for me, even though it was very sudden for, in terms of like publicly, it was very sudden. I mean, that had been happening for quite a while by that point. So for me, I'd had quite a deterioration in how much I was enjoying it already and how much love I had for it. And I did take in the past, how many years has it been? 6 years, 7 years? I don't know, a while. I've taken more years off the bike in that time than I have on. It's not like I'm someone who's transitioned straight into then, oh, I'm just going to start doing other types of cycling. And a lot of it was rediscovering what I actually would choose to do if I hadn't been sucked along by this sort of thing that was happening around me and what other people wanted from me. And that's been a lot of the sort of void of discovery, has been, oh, what would I do if I just chose it and it didn't matter what anyone else thought. And I think probably this year, for the first time, I've had a big switch in wanting to be good at it again and wanting to train for it and wanting to work hard for it. I almost had this sort of rebellion against, oh, well, the best years are gone, sort of that peaked in high school thing of I don't even want to try because it's like, well, I'm not going to be as good as I was. And this is the first time I've kind of made peace with that whole situation. And okay, it wasn't kind of how my life was meant to go. And I guess kind of got rid of the chip on my shoulder a bit and the bitterness, because it is hard. You're watching this kind of sliding doors thing. This entire time since, you've been watching people kind of live the life that you could have had. It's like, oh, here's what you could have won, and you're just watching it play out and get better and better, which is, it's brilliant for the people who are still in the sport, that it's got so much better and professionalized, and there is more money and all that sort of stuff. But you have sort of watched that happen, and it could have been you. And there's a bit of a process of just getting over yourself and being like, okay, that's not how it went, but what else can I do with this? Kind of, it's a gift to be good at something and enjoy it and have an opportunity to go and do cool stuff with it. And sort of, I think I had a lot of time thinking that was all wasted, sort of from the ages of what, 15, 16, sort of mid 20s, that, oh, what a waste of time, that all came to nothing and it's pointless. But actually, that was still life experience that built you into who you are, and that was still learning a skill and being on the bike and having those opportunities. That being able to then go and race ultras, that's not something that anyone can just necessarily pick up and do. And it was like an easy transition for me, really, because I kind of already knew how the world worked in the cycling sort of world, and how to ride a bike and how to train, all those sorts of things. So actually, there are things that it gives you, even if it's not kind of what you're watching play out on TV in front of you.
Yeah, I think those skills we learn as an athlete are translatable to all aspects of life, whether you're dealing with, you know, in your career, really tough times and you have to be resilient, or to be honest with just the general shit that life throws at you when people get sick in your life, or someone that you love, you lose. That kind of resilience is important. And I think it's a huge part of why my parents put me into sport, was, you know, to not to toughen me up or something, but I was a child who was very introverted, and I know that they wanted me to be exposed to a more competitive environment where I learned to challenge myself and to show up every day. And so I wonder the difference between the mindset between, because I'm very curious about ultra sports, because I know there's the physical element and the mental element, like there is with with road racing or track cycling or rowing or any kind of endurance type sport. But what is the key difference mentally, do you think, between going out and racing a 150-kilometer road race and going out and doing an ultra? Like, can you give us a little bit of an insight into how you've changed, like, your mindset?
I think there's, I mean, it's obviously a physical thing, but I do think once you're in a certain band of like physicality with other riders, it then becomes who's got the best mentality or who holds up the best mentally or whatever. A lot of it is the isolation. Like you're completely on your own. It's unsupported. So whereas if you're in any other type of racing, even if it's not road racing where there's following cars and radios and stuff, there's still people helping you. There's still people that like, you know, there's pits or there's people shouting you as you go on the laps or what, you know, whatever. There's some form of support there. So that's one of the things is isolation, and for so long as well. I don't really race anything that's less than in days, sort of 4-5 days minimum. I mean, Transpreneurs was I think 8, so that's a long time to be completely on your own in a sporting event, in a race. So I think there's the isolation that comes with that. If something goes wrong, it's like, oh, I have to fix. There's no one else is going to help me, and they're not allowed to help me. And I think, yeah, I guess just the time you're on your own as well. It's a long time to be. The clock never stops, so it's not like, oh, I get, not even in a stage race, okay, at least you get to the end of the stage and then you can debrief and you can go to a hotel and you can rest. You'll get into a hotel, it's like, okay, right, okay, how long can I stop for, how many hours can I stop for, what have I got to do? You've got lists on your phone or mental lists of the things you need to remember to do before you move on, or stuff's going to start going wrong the next day. It's that thing of being in a competition for so long. I mean, even a short ultra, let's say it's only 3 days, that's still 3 days and nights of non-stop being in a race. It's just quite tiring to keep yourself sort of mentally positive and also not make stupid mistakes and stuff, because if you're not efficient mentally, you start to forget to do stuff and then you have to then deal with the consequences of that.
So what's the craziest thing that's happened to you in an ultra?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, every time you make a mistake, something, I mean, stupid stuff. I mean, probably actually being chased by a guy on a moped in Morocco, but that's not that fun a story. That was a case of, I mean, it's a difficult place to do an ultra anyway, especially if you're a woman. That was a guy who followed me out of a town on a moped. It's really late at night. And there's a thing in ultra of you're in a race and people don't understand, even if it's kind of like Western and there's a shared language or whatever. Being like, I'm in a race, like people don't understand about that you're any second you're like counting. So this guy follows me out of this town and I don't know what he's saying, he's trying to say stuff. And you should be freaked out because you're thinking, oh, a guy's following me. But really, you're just thinking, you're ruining my race. And then I found this like really good camp spot, which is hard to find places to like camp out, wild camping and all that sort of stuff. And he like followed me to it. And so I was like, oh, it's safe to stay here now because he's followed me. He's trying to like hassle me. He's probably trying to get me to go to a house just because they're very funny about you. Like, oh, you can't be out here on your own. You can't, it's not safe. And again, you should be thinking, oh, this is probably not a great situation. It's quite dangerous. But actually, I was thinking, I have to pack my camping stuff up now. And I'm so pissed off because I hate camping anyway. And I hate the process of like, you're trying to time getting your camping stuff out and like you give yourself a maximum amount of time before you have to be asleep and all this stuff. And they've just completely ruined it for you. So this is someone who like is harassing you and you should be more scared about it. And you're just like, I'm in a race. You don't understand what's happening. Like, and I think there's so much of that where people will, whether it's good or bad, there'll be interactions where you're really just trying to explain what you're doing. And you have it, people are like, oh, you can't go up that road, it's not safe. And you're like, I have to keep going in this direction. And they can't understand that you like can't go another way. There's all these like weird things that come with trying to explain to someone what an ultra is in the moment and no one understanding why you would carry on into the storm or whatever it is. So I've had that a fair bit where in hotels it always happens because you'll check into a hotel, it's like 24-hour check-in, you always go for 24-hour check-ins, and you'll check in at 1 a.m. and you'll be there like shivering, like dripping wet with like your bike that's like destroyed. You'll go to a hotel room And then the same person will be at work when you leave at 3 a.m., like 2 hours later. And I'm like, where are you going? It's like dark and it's night and there's a storm in the mountains and you're like, I have to keep going. I'm only allowed 2 hours. And you can tell they just don't understand what is happening. Um, and I mean, it's quite funny because, yeah, to them, that's, you don't explain it because you haven't got time. So they just get this weird, and you're still in like wet kit that you just put back on. And yeah, I just think I just wonder what story they tell someone when they get home, like this weird people, quite often more than one of you, who all claim not to know each other in this hotel. So that's quite often one.
I think you just gave us a little bit of an insight into the mindset of an ultra athlete. I mean, I'm just visualizing this, and it's wild. I mean, can you talk us through what a week of training would look like for an ultra athlete then? I mean, I guess it varies because all these distances you're doing are very different. Like you said, an ultra can be 3 days or it could be 8 days.
Yeah.
And the demands are different as well. So how do you structure your training going from, like, you know, I look at, I'll go back to professional road cycling because it's what I know, how structured it is with our training leading into races and tapering off. And then, of course, there's a recovery after a race before you go into the next race. Like, realistically, how many races can an ultra athlete take on in a year, and how do you structure around that?
Yeah, I think how many races you can do depends on how good you are at having different priorities, having different goals. If you want to race everyone full on, you can't do many. I mean, maybe in a year. I think this year I did maybe 4, maybe 5. I don't remember, but not all of them I raced like full on. I used some as prep, but you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to switch off and go, okay, I'm going to be more sensible in this one. I mean, a lot of volume, no top end. There's no like, oh, should we go for a sprint session? Because if you're sprinting, you're doing it wrong. There shouldn't be any time for sprinting. So a lot of endurance, a lot of strength, depending on what ultra you're doing, a lot of strength stuff. Kind of something that changed for me a lot was, especially with an off-road ultra, there's a lot of hiking, a lot of carrying a bike that's also a loaded mountain bike a lot of the time. So a lot of stuff on my feet, which I never did, and a lot more strength work, just because that is, I mean, again, back to Atlas, that you hike quite a few passes there with a bike that's a fully loaded full sus bike, and there's a lot of strength you need to be able to lift the bike over and over and over again, all that sort of stuff, but also injury prevention in, you have to go for runs or hikes or whatever, which isn't my favorite, but we do it. And then quite a lot of sort of strength endurance, but I don't do anything. I don't kind of do intervals in the sense of, like, I don't know, over unders or sprint stuff, or, I'm not doing a lead out train anymore. So I mean, more things like tempo work, like over gig climbing stuff. I mean, a bit of threshold and like climbing intervals and things, but I mean, so much of it comes down to how long can you ride at that sort of mid intensity for. So mine's pretty unstructured. I am actually going much more structured next year, just because I'm slightly changing what I'm doing next year. But for this one, this year it was much more kind of just building up the endurance. And I did quite a lot of FKTs and sort of race efforts around it. So I did quite a lot of stuff that sort of simulated a short ultra, just because it's hard to practice doing an ultra without doing an ultra.
And so what are the plans for next year? Is there some gravel on there? Is, like, Unbound something that you would ever do?
Absolutely not.
No?
Absolutely
I feel
not.
like what about the XL Unbound?
I just don't think I want to be in the bunch again. I mean, maybe so. I'm very much like a never say never person. I don't particularly want to do anything bunch racy again, and I know that I'm probably not the right person mentally for that sort of atmosphere and stuff. I think you have to know yourself and kind of know what would actually be like a negative place for you to be. And I think maybe that type of competitiveness, that type of racing, I'm not sure it was something that I would thrive in anymore. So it would probably be a bit of a wasted kind of thing to pursue.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I haven't spoken with a few retired athletes, particularly ones with short careers, and athletes that start out as children. You're kind of steered in a direction, like, your parent sees that you're quite talented, you enjoy sport, and then you naturally end up doing it competitively. And it's kind of like whatever sport you go into, you're competing. But then again, going to to the point about people who are maybe a bit more introverted at times, I feel like that, at least I can speak to the road scene, that real competitiveness and that selfishness and that ego you have to carry to be successful. And I'm not saying this is all athletes, but I almost think I can generalize in a sense that speaking to some of these retired athletes, that was kind of the thing that was missing with them. They recognized that they had the talent, they recognized they had the mindset, but at the end of the day, they had this feeling of like something was missing and they were a bit lost and searching for it and wondering what they were doing. And I think it comes all back to purpose. And if that's not aligning with your purpose, then you end up having these years where you're lost. I know I had it myself, and I think you touched on it, that you didn't immediately go into ultra. You were trying to find your way, and it wasn't a very easy time because, of course, COVID happened pretty quickly after you decided to fully step away from pro cycling.
Yeah, I think I've learned over the last, probably only the last couple of years, to only do stuff that I really want to do. And it's hard when people say, oh, why do you want to do that? It's a feeling. There's not kind of an objective, oh, that makes sense. I think even in the first year I was riding sort of the ultra scene, I was still doing stuff where I was like, oh, that makes sense that I would go and do that. Kind of like the same of like, oh, would you do an Unbound XL or like equivalent? There is that sort of, oh, I could probably find a way in my head that I think, oh yeah, that is a good career move, or that makes sense, and I could train for it. I could transform how I ride, and maybe that would fit better with who I am. But I just think unless you really feel that you want to do it, it just doesn't go well. And I mean, people are different mentally. Some people are just great at just doing whatever the target is and going for it, and it doesn't really matter what it is. If they could win it, they go for it, and they're brilliant at it. I know that I'm someone who I have to really want to do it. Otherwise, it's just going to be a horrible experience. And I kind of wanted, one of the things when I started riding again was, the end goal of this has to be that it's fun and I enjoy it. That has to be the kind of end goal, and anything that comes with that is great. So I even said from the start of when I was going to give ultra a go, I was like, if I don't enjoy this, I'll just stop cycling again. Like, that's okay. I don't have to do this. It doesn't have to be that this is who I am. It could have been that I tried a different sport and I was good at that, and I could have never cycled in my life. This is just almost like an accident that this happened. So I shouldn't feel bound to it. I shouldn't feel like, oh, then that has to be what I do, or my life doesn't have meaning, and that I didn't fulfill my purpose because I could have been good at it. I think there's this thing of people are like, oh, but you could have been good. It's like, well, yeah, cool, and that's fine, but it has to be that I find joy in it, and then like results may or may not come, and success may or may not come, but then at least it's been great, and you can just move on happily. Not this kind of, oh yeah, it was awful, and then it was maybe good or bad. Probably bad, because probably like mentally you don't do well, and we all know that if you're not psychologically doing well, then that's kind of the beginning of the end, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it sounds like your identity is no longer tied to Molly, the road cyclist, or Molly, the ultra athlete now. You're just Molly Weaver, and you're doing something that you're passionate about, and you're juggling that currently with your work. How does that look in a day? Because you're obviously got flexible hours. You're like me. You're a bit of a digital nomad, so you can work on the road. Have you ever had to do a bit of work during an ultra?
Never during an ultra. I'm very close to an ultra, but yeah, I work super flexi time, and I have kind of like unlimited unpaid leave, so I can just be, oh, I'm just going to go and do this thing. I mean, never in an ultra. You're very in and out of. It's kind of the least contactable you ever are. People say, oh, I won't be able to get back to you. There's no, by kind of day, in the first couple of days, you're doing all right. And then it gets to a point where even just holding your phone up becomes like this, just so hard. So this becomes this massive chore, and having to write a text, you almost can't like physically do it. You're like, I'm so tired.
Voice notes, Molly.
Yeah, voice notes. I know, because I also, not sponsored, I got a quad lock this year, which was revolutionary for me, because I could just like lean on the bars and just like swipe up and just start a voice note and ramble. So I was actually much more in touch in this one than normal, because normally like everything's so tired, even like holding a phone up, your arm will be just, you'll be like, this is wasted energy. I need this. But yeah, I mean, I forget what the point was to start with.
Well, I think we were going to go into what your plans are for 2025, but I try to be I've got to we've got to cater to the audience a little bit. So I thought there would be some interested people to know if you're doing gravel. Gravel is off the cards. We're not going to talk about it. But what are your plans for 2025?
Next year, I decided to, not that I want to move away from ultra racing. I felt like I had a really big year of it. And I didn't have anything next year that was sort of really inspiring me to enter. But I have been loving kind of the FKTs and chasing kind of records on things, and more sort of solo stuff. And then obviously like little World Cups went around the world, and that kind of, I was like, oh yeah, something in that realm. I was thinking of doing the European Divide, but I thought, oh, maybe that's, for in a couple of years' time. And then I kind of went down this rabbit hole of stuff you could do in the UK and in Britain, and kind of decided probably, well, by the time this comes out, a long time ago, but at the moment it was a few months ago, that I wanted to go for a world record of some sort. So I've decided to go for the world record for the coastline of the UK.
Oh, wow.
So just
okay,
like
tell us a little bit about this. What is that?
So it's 7,000 and some amount of kilometers, 7,700 and something K. And it's basically around the edge of mainland Britain, so the entire coastline. And the records was set, broken. The last time it was broken was 1984.
Wow.
So it stood for a long time. People have tried. They've either not finished at all, or they've done it in longer than it was. So it currently stands at 22 days. So my
22 days.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's 5 kilometers a day.
Yeah.
So my goal would be 21. I mean,
Okay.
obviously, we'll see what happens, but that's kind of, that's going to be from now. That's how everything's built around that. I think it's possible. I think it's doable, but it has to be, that's the only focus. It can't be that I'm also trying to race ultras all over the place and kind of diluting the target and getting tired and risking injury and stuff.
I mean, I know you're really goal orientated and focused, so maybe having this one huge goal is exactly what you need, particularly with your body, because I know that ultra cycling is super, super demanding, and you've had some injuries, some that weren't related to ultra cycling itself, but that's a big part of it, I think, within the ultra world, because you're pushing your body to the limit and over the limit, which I think is why I know myself, I have such a fascination in this part of the sport, because of just, I can't comprehend what you're doing. So 21 days, you're going to cycle around the whole border, the coastline, basically, of the UK. What time of year are you planning on trying to attempt this?
So I'm going to do it in the sort of second half of June, first bit of July. Kind of going for the longest daylight, hopefully the best weather, although it's Britain, so you can never predict it. And also not in school holidays, because I think that'd be quite challenging traffic-wise. So that's kind of, I mean, I haven't got like a super fun date at the moment. I'm thinking the last 2 weeks of June, first week of July. But it's, I feel weirdly, obviously I'm terrified and it's really scary and stuff, but I'm also feel much more relaxed about the fact that it's, like you say, it's one thing you can build towards. You can have a better plan for it. And I have felt this year a little bit like I'm kind of punishing my body quite regularly, and you're never quite recovering from stuff, and then you're going again. So I have this, especially coming off a few weeks off, I have this feeling of, it's quite nice to start winter training and be like, I haven't got a race in a month. I don't have to be good in a month. I'd have to always be kind of at the best you can be. I've got sort of 7 months now to do some actual build up, and it'd be a bit more calm and considered.
And what sort of support do you need for an event like this?
So it will be supported. It's only ever been done supported, and it was set supported, this current record. So I don't think it's really possible to do it unsupported now. I mean, potentially it could be, but yeah, it's already kind of on the limit. So I think if you have to carry all your stuff and do everything yourself, I think that you'd lose too much time. So I will have a following support crew in a van or a camper, but it won't be literally following me on the road. The rough plan at the moment is that I'd obviously see them in the morning, and then maybe at like a halfway point of the day, and then the end. So I'll be pretty much on my own, but they'll be able to give me sort of resupply and stuff. And then obviously at the end, dinner and somewhere to sleep and all that sort of stuff. I won't have to be like putting up a tent in a ditch somewhere.
Yeah, because Lael Wilcox, she came through Bruges, so I got a little bit of an insight into how she was attempting that world record, because I rode with her for about 2 hours. I met her partner, and they filmed the whole thing because they're producing a movie, which I'm really looking forward to when it comes out. But yeah, 22 days. And how much are you aiming for per day again?
It's about 370 kilometers. Some
Okay.
days I'll do over 400, other days you do less, depending on how hilly and the wind. Because I mean, the coast is super windy. So, I mean, that's something you have to plan quite late on, is where the prevailing wind is. But also, some of it is really hilly and some of it is pretty flat. It does vary a lot as you go around the country.
Will you be inviting people to join you on the ride, or are you one of those people who wants people along?
Um, I typically like to be on my own. I mean, I don't think I'd mind it. I might have it be that people can come and join, but not for sort of hours and not for most of a day. I'm kind of, once I'm in the zone and in my rhythm. But actually, I don't know how I'll be on this. This is very much like a new avoided discovery kind of thing. So I've never done anything supported or semi-supported, and I've not really done stuff where anyone ever rides with you. I mean, ultra races very occasionally. Normally somebody doesn't even know what you're doing. It's just a rider who's happens to like come across the race or whatever. So I've not really had it where I've been in something where there is that opportunity for people to ride with you. So it's tricky to know what you'll be like until you're in it. I also, yeah, I don't know, because it's going to be more regimented. It's not going to be like you're trying to get into a hotel and sleep for a couple of hours and start again. There's going to be more regimented. You're already planned how long you'll do in a day, rather than as far as you can and then you try and find somewhere to sleep. So I'm not sure how the psychology will be of there being a target on each day and how tight it will be. So yeah, I mean, maybe a lot of it will come down to how I'm feeling mentally.
Well, we'll put your in the show notes. We'll put like your Instagram link and everything. And are you gonna have a website or anything for this?
Yeah, there'll be a website for it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're calling it On the Edge because it's on the edge of the UK. So that'll be like the website will be on the edge. And yeah, hopefully it'll be sort of well documented. But I'm still in the process of project managing the logistics of it.
Aha, and this is why you couldn't get back to me. So this is the big
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
Well, that's
This is the big
exciting.
thing. Yeah.
It's would you say this is your biggest goal since retiring?
Yeah, I'd say this is the
Or
first
let's not use
time
the word retiring. I hate that word. Stopping with
stepping
one
away.
stopping with one type of cycling.
Yeah. I think so, because I think I mean, obviously it's still going to be an amazing journey. There's still going to be other stories that come with it, but it's probably the first time that, firstly, that I'll have built up so long for something. I've always had it. It's always been a bit of a safety net having lots of things going on, because if one thing goes wrong, you're like, well, all right, I've got an ultra in a month. So it wasn't like stakes weren't that high, because there was always another goal that you could go for, which took a lot of the pressure off and kind of it diluted each one, but it made each one have way less pressure on it, and it wasn't so important. Whereas, yeah, if you build a year around one thing, there's a lot of kind of stress that comes with that, and also you're putting a goal out there that I'm going to try and do this in this many days. I'm going to try and break all the records. It's a very objective target. Whereas anything else, you can kind of make your own narrative of how you wanted it to go and how it ended up going. So I'd say it's my biggest goal in terms of how hard it's going to be and how far I think it is towards the edge of my capabilities. And also the fact that it's going to be a lot of eyes on this one thing that has a very clear target and goal. So there is like an excitement that comes with that, but also the fear of, oh, okay, what if it doesn't go well? Which I have to manage carefully.
I think it's always challenging when you put something out into the universe, right? When you say the words and you put it on social media, it's there. And then all the pressure kind of falls on your own shoulders. But I think you're not, pressure is not something unusual to you. And I think this sort of pressure is a different type of pressure. And you can do everything leading up to that moment. And then actually when you're there out on the road, it's the cards have to fall where they need to fall. But I would like to be there definitely for part of it. So we're going to have to discuss how we can make that happen. And maybe we'll have to have a follow-up on the podcast. So all the listeners know exactly how it went in terms of once you've had time to process it. But that's very exciting for 2025. And I think it's just so great to hear that you're doing well, and you seem so at peace with yourself now. Which for anyone who's followed your journey, they're going to be super thrilled. And I hope you share this podcast on your platform, because I know you've got a lot of loyal fans that have been following your journey from day one, since Instagram's kind of been about. And do you have any final advice for people who kind of want to dip their toes into ultra? Because I know sometimes bike packing can be like the entry point.
Yeah, I think firstly, just enjoy it. I mean, it's so cliche, but you can sort of build up so much pressure on it being an ultra versus a bikepacking trip or some kind of traveling you've done on a bike. But it is just a long bike ride. Like, I always say that before I go on an ultra. I mean, it's so my dad always says it to me, like, it's just a long bike ride. You're like, oh yeah, actually, if you're ready, if you've got to the point where this is something you really want to do, you've probably already explored other like things you've been bikepacking, or you followed the racing or whatever's happened. And I think you can get so wrapped up in the fact it's an ultra race, when actually it's just the same. You're just doing the same stuff as you would if you were doing it by yourself. And winning isn't everything in them. There's so many people with different goals throughout it. And I think there's a beauty in the fact that it's not that you race to win or you do nothing. There's kind of all of these things that can happen in this space. And yeah, just enjoy it. And it's just a long bike ride. You know how to do that.
A very, very, very long bike ride.
It's a very long bike ride, but it's just a long bike ride, I promise.
And in 2025, Molly's got a very, 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 very long bike ride coming up that we're going to look forward to following.
When you're saying, like, it's just long bike ride, Molly, and I'm like, oh yeah, I said that.
I'll send you that message the day before you start.
Yeah, or halfway through when I've completely cracked, and you're like, what are you talking about? It's just long bike ride.
So I'll send you a voice note, not a text message.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, Molly, for joining us, and we wish you all the best. Like I mentioned, we'll put it in the show notes how to follow Molly and her journey in 2025. And we'll also link to those articles that Molly wrote a few years ago. So yeah, thanks, Molly.
Thank you.